for the things that mattered most. Those experiences shaped our lives. Now we're husbands, wives, parents, and friends. And sometimes we forget that the biggest challenge can be asking for support. The Veterans Crisis Line is here for veterans. Dial 1-800-273-8255 and press 1. It matters.
It's important to plan ahead for emergencies, like the storm. When it kicked in, we had a plan. We were able to get in touch with each other in no time.
No idea how to find each other.
My husband kept the kids occupied.
Calling our son, but there was no reception. Everything was down.
I felt like we
breaking
handled
down and
everything
crying,
very
but I
well.
had to try and stay calm.
The whole experience was fine.
Was the most frightening 10 hours of my life.
It was kind of like a little family
every
adventure.
mother hopes will never happen to her.
I remember the
moment
relief of being
I
together.
realized he was out there all alone.
If there's one piece of advice I'd offer other moms out there, it's to stay calm and keep to the plan.
Some parents plan ahead, some don't. Make sure you know where to find your family in an emergency. Start your plan at ready.gov. A public service announcement brought to you by FEMA and the Ad Council.
Talk 1470 is WWNN Pompano Beach and 95.3 FM W237BD Boca Raton, the Health and Wealth Radio Network.
If you suffer with diabetes, there's a 25% chance that you'll develop a foot ulcer that can lead to severe health consequences, including amputation. At the sole authority, at little or no cost, you can receive your very own therapeutic shoes and custom inserts. Medicare recipients are entitled to 1 pair of quality diabetic shoes and 3 custom inserts. Call the sole authority today, 954-597-7060.
The opinions expressed on the following sponsored program are strictly those of the host, guests, and callers, and not necessarily those of this station, its staff, management, or sponsors.
It's Monday night at 9 p.m. and time for Sex Talk with the Siegel brothers. Dr. Ricky Siegel is a certified sex therapist, educator, and supervisor, and his brother Larry Siegel is a clinical sexologist and certified sexuality educator. The Siegel brothers are here to answer all your questions about sex and sexuality, but we're unsure who to ask, including questions you didn't even know you had. They will also welcome guests from around the globe to talk about a wide variety of topics and issues within the fascinating world of sexuality. Thank you for joining us, and welcome to Sex Talk.
Good evening. It's Monday at 9 p.m. and it's time for Sex Talk with the Siegel brothers. Thank you for joining us. My name is Ricky Siegel, a certified sex therapist.
I'm Larry Siegel, a clinical sexologist and certified sexuality educator. Welcome.
Thanks for joining us tonight, and thank you, as always, my brother and best friend.
My pleasure. It's great to be with you, as we do every Monday night.
And, well, I can't quite embarrass you like you did last week on my birthday, because we missed yours by a couple of days, but belated happy birthday to you, old man. This past Saturday was Larry's birthday, day before yesterday, and we did nothing, because we're old men and we don't deserve birthday parties anymore.
Well, I've been sick.
Yeah, should have a party.
So
be fun.
Yeah.
But it's time for Sex Talk. Give us a call if you're listening on the radio. We're in South Florida on 95.3 FM, 1470 AM on your radio dial, or we're streaming live on Facebook right now. You can hit that little send email button on our Facebook page at Sex Talk with the Siegel Brothers, or call in at 888-565-1470.
And also in giving out phone numbers, if anybody has an interest or a need in private consultation and psychotherapy, you can contact Dr. Ricky here at 561-809-1080.
Thank you very much for that plug. Feel free to give us a call. Again, you can call privately if you want a question. You could send questions live on Facebook, or send them later on, and we can get back to you during the week. Don't be shy. Don't be afraid to ask.
No, and sponsors call anytime.
Yeah. Or if anybody knows of anybody who might want to sponsor and advertise on our show, we will not turn you away. Well, we will if we don't like you. I thought about that. What if somebody wants to give us money for some horrible product that we don't like?
We say no.
I can't do that.
No.
I can't lie. And say, or you know, what if I don't know? It would be interesting if like a porn company or a Hustler store or something like that. I think
Well,
that
I think
could be a fit.
there's nothing wrong with
'Cause
that.
it's sex talk. And
Sure,
talk
we can
about
maintain
sex.
integrity.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we've been called sex workers before.
That's absolutely.
There's worse insults have been
That's
hurled our
right.
way. So what we thought would be a fun topic for tonight, because it seems like so many things in sexuality, it gets trendy again. Right?
Mm-hmm.
There's never anything new. Like George Harrison famously said in his plagiarism case, there's only 88 keys on the piano.
That's right.
You're bound to repeat something eventually.
Mm-hmm.
He was actually found guilty of accidental plagiarism.
Accidental plagiarism, right. Even Elvis Costello said there's no such thing as an original sin.
Yeah, an original sin.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So this trendy thing we've been talking about a little bit today is the broad topic of polyamory.
Mm-hmm.
And I say broad because now it seems to be kind of user-defined.
Well, and it really is. And I think it speaks to the larger evolution and concept of just relationships.
Right.
Because I don't think they're really, and again, it's gotten so user-defined. Mm-hmm. And I think it's gotten so diffuse.
Well, what's the running gag? I'm polyamorous. Oh, yeah?
Right.
Does your partner know?
For years, that's always been my first question when somebody tells me that. Yes, I'm in a polyamorous relationship. Does your partner know? That was kind of standard.
Right.
Right? But now...
Well, that came out of I think the kind of serial monogamy when we used to do HIV testing counseling and, I'm monogamous or, is your partner... That same kind of theme.
Right.
That the idea is you both have to be monogamous to be assured of your HIV status.
Exactly.
So,
right. And it's about defining the relationship.
Yeah. So it would be helpful if everyone were involved in a polyamorous relationship who kind of shared the ethos, the philosophy, the way of life, whatever is involved. But notice I caught myself from saying both people have to be polyamorous because that's sort of where the problem starts. Right. Poly implies more than two. Mm-hmm. So if a couple is identifying as poly, well, that's where things start to split off. Right. So let's start with this kind of broad, throw it all, spitball definition. What is polyamory? Is it swinging? Is it partner swapping? Is it open relationships? And what does that mean? What's an open marriage? Is it you do your thing, I'll do mine, and at the end of the day, we'll come home together? All of these things get called polyamory.
Sure, including go do what you want, just don't ever tell me about it, or go do what you want, and I want to hear every detail.
Or you can only play if I'm there watching, or you can only play if I'm participating.
Right. So I think this is all of this speaks to how diffuse and arbitrary I think terms like polyamory have become.
Yeah, well, I think the newest incarnation or use of the term to add to this trendiness is the classic, usually guys, but sometimes women, who wants to have their cake and eat it too. Right? They want to be involved in a relationship, but don't want to be tied down. They want their sexual freedom. They want to have other partners, but still someone to come home to at night. So I think a lot of partners end up getting dragged into this, maybe not so willingly, maybe not so on the same page as the more adventurous one who's maybe egging on, come on, it'll be great. One thing we should say, we both know this, but our listeners need to know that polyamory, or whatever you call it, opening a relationship, experimenting with threesomes, any of this should never, ever be seen as a way of fixing a relationship that's dying.
That's kind of,
right?
Part of the punchline.
A relationship has to be so solid, if we're starting with that duo, with a dyad, to discuss sharing, opening up a relationship, inviting in other partners. A relationship has to be solid.
Right. And if you're starting with a coupleship already, then, that's something that we've been talking about for years, that opening up the relationship, if you don't already have that really solid foundation, if part of why people want to do that is not the enjoyment that they get seeing their partner being pleasured by somebody else, they are doomed to failure.
Well, jealousy,
and that's exactly right.
Is a human emotion that most people have, and it's definitely not everyone who can handle sharing their intimate partner and not feeling jealous.
Right, right. And people that are not starting with that sort of already part of a couple, then it's a complete redefinition of relationship or sexual interaction.
Yeah. I mean, it really confuses people to see a single individual person that identifies as polyamorous. They say, but you're single. Yeah, that kind of fits.
That's kind of the point.
Right?
Yeah.
They're not looking to pair off, but maybe have, I love this word I only heard just a couple of years ago for the first time, polycule.
Yes.
Right? Like molecule, but a polycule. It could be 4 or 6, just an arrangement of an equal relationship. It kind of reminds me of the old hippie idea of a commune, except it's sexual intimacy that's equally shared.
Sure.
Right? It stands in contrast with the idea of polygamy, which, of course, is illegal in every state in the country, where one person, usually one man, has many wives.
Right. And polygamy is specifically about spousal relationships.
A marriage relationship, yeah.
Right, and because of laws.
And what we've talked about many times on this show, the old ownership rights. A husband owned his wife, and in a culture where he was lucky enough to have several wives, right? So it wasn't shared in that same way because it centered around the husband. And the wives are sister wives, as some
right, and it was usually a primary wife.
Right.
Yeah. So there was definitely some stratification, that was a part of that those dynamics. And I think right now, it's kind of wide open. Certain terms are often brought into this stuff too, and people talk about, well, I'm polyamorous because I'm pansexual, or I'm I'm pansexual poly. Which is a nice little nickname right there, I guess. Pansexual
poly.
And I think these are words that are right now really kind of devoid of meaning, and they're in the process of evolving, and I think taking on new meanings for people, however they want to be used.
Kind of like the alphabet soup political correct thing that where I was talking about, the LGBTQIAGNC.
The othering.
CNM, right? Gender nonconforming, consensual non-monogamy, all of this whole, are we serving a purpose or are we perpetuating this othering?
Yeah, I think it just perpetuates the othering because it's basically one big category. You're either heterosexual
or something
or
else.
You're a letter in the alphabet soup.
So there should be a H for heterosexual.
I think that should be a part of it if it's going to be what it claims to be.
To define sexual orientation, then we also got to take the T out of there.
Yeah.
Because gender is not about sexual orientation.
That's right.
So transgender people get lumped in together with gays and lesbians. Why? Because there's room at the local community gay and lesbian center?
Exactly. So
by default,
I think more than
ever,
right? More than ever, and especially when people are negotiating different kind of relationships and relationship dynamics, more than ever, we can't just use terms, right? We've been, again, for years saying things like we take for granted that because we use the same words that we're on the same page.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So more than ever, when somebody says or identifies themselves with any of these things, we have to ask, what do you mean by that? And I think people also need to be a little bit more accepting of the fact that just because they want to consider themselves that doesn't mean anybody else sees them in that way.
Right.
And that's there's a little bit of that progressive, maybe a little millennial intolerance that people sometimes do talk about that I think is valid.
Because you ask the question that you have to be offended.
Right.
You're right. That's a little hypersensitive. The snowflakes.
So we have to be willing to explain. We have to be willing to express. Right. It's part of communication. And I think, like I said, now more than ever, I think we have to have those explanations. Because, again, you ask 3 different people what they mean when they use these words, they're going to give you different answers.
Right. So how would you define pansexual as it's being used in this trendy way?
Well, to be honest with you, the way people use it today is sort of synonymous, just become a replacement for bisexual
because
in a lot of ways.
Still too restrictive.
That's right.
Don't make me.
That's right. Don't put
check
baby in a corner.
Right. Being attracted to both men and women is not broad enough.
Exactly.
That bisexuals can find. Interesting.
Right. I mean, a real pansexual, it doesn't matter what it is. It's not about a who. It's an anything. Truly anything goes.
But also, I like the idea of it. In fact, I think I first heard this 30-some-odd years ago from our surprise guest last week, Elizabeth Caparose. The idea of just falling in love with a person's essence before their gender comes into focus.
Yeah.
That they fall in love with the person and their gender is secondary.
Right. Right. And I always used to consider people who did not, and again, not even referring to them specifically as bisexual, but people who just don't identify as heterosexual or homosexual. I think in a lot of ways, people that identify that way are limiting themselves. They're restricting themselves.
So people
I think
use
like Woody Allen even once said, and forgive me for quoting Woody Allen at this point in time, but, again, being bisexual means you can eat off of both sides of the buffet.
Or it doubles your chances of getting a date on a Saturday night.
Exactly.
Like you have twice as fat a little black book.
Right.
Yeah, that's
but
pretty
it does,
silly.
And again, that's that old things that, it's still based on that binary.
Right.
But in fact, a lot of people, especially people that have developed a mature sense of their own sexual identity, that don't use any labels. Like you're attracted to men, you're attracted to women. Well, it depends. I'm attracted to the person.
Right. Well, there's a word we've been using in our undergrad classes for many years that usually requires some explanation, heteronormativity or heterosexism, kind of the assumption that most people are, it's assumed that most people are heterosexual or that you're kind of supposed to be, and again, everyone else is a minority of some kind. The classic gym coach telling the guys in gym class, well, remember, fellas, when you're with your gals, wrap it up, instead of saying when you're with your partner, so that you're talking to everyone and not making assumptions. Well, this idea has been borrowed. I found this wonderful article. Actually, I can thank Julia in Chicago from our Chicago Institute for sending me this article. I looked. I can't find the author's name beyond just being a regular blogger called Sex Geek, just like I wonder if it's the same folks behind this Sex Geek stickers.
Could be.
But it's a wonderful article called The Problem with Polynormativity, where she's taken the same concept and applied it to this trendy use of the term polyamory, kind of self-proclaimed poly person venting and taking umbrage at the trendy use of the term, I suppose. But she makes some really good points. And again, I wish I can cite her as anything more than Sex Geek, but I don't know how big and popular the blog is. Oh, there it is. Andrea Zanin. I have not seen her name before I read this article. But 4 points, and just bounce off these. She talks about this problem of seeing through this polynormative lens. In other words, how the wider society is growing more comfortable and accepting, slow and hesitant as it is, like with things like kink and gay marriage and everything else that's not just heteronormative.
Right.
Applying the same principle, she makes these 4 points, that polynormativity starts with a couple. And it's like I said before, if the couple is talking about being poly, there's something counterintuitive, something contradictory about a polyamorous couple.
Exactly.
Because
as opposed to just an open
more
relationship.
Than two. Right. And then I guess feeding off that, the second point is that idea of the relationship being hierarchical. So that if a couple is poly, if they're opening up their relationship, then they're the primary partners, and everybody else that
Everyone's
they
an
might bring
accessory.
in is secondary. That also kind of goes against the idea of what polyamory is supposed to be about. Right? It's a in fact, the secondaries, quote unquote, the next point she makes is about rules, right? The secondaries have rules about their involvement before they're even involved.
That's right. They're not even a part of the rule making or the decision making
yet.
Exactly.
And the couple has these rules. So Yeah.
So
it's a
they're not.
good
These are
use.
not polyamorous relationships.
Right,
These are
they're
maybe
not.
open relationships. These are swinging. These
Yeah.
are, maybe people that are sort of, altering their lifestyle and broadening their relationships. But it's kind of hard pressed to refer to these as polyamorous.
And I think a lot of therapists, even some sex therapists, get kind of sucked into this with helping a couple negotiate. What does it mean if they want to change their relationship and open it up?
Right.
And how
Negotiating non-monogamy.
Negotiating non-monogamy usually means a bunch of rules.
Right. And I think this is where we've come as well, that non-monogamy is now one of these trigger words. Non-monogamy is synonymous with polyamory.
But in how many people's minds is non-monogamy also synonymous with cheating?
Well, a lot, which is why now how many books are there? Exactly. There's now that whole new term, consensual non-monogamy, negotiating ethical non-monogamy. There's all these qualifiers on non-monogamy.
The ethical slut, Dossie Easton and
Janet Hardy.
Right.
Yeah.
ASECT colleagues. Mm-hmm. And remember when Dossie Easton presented at a conference and how outraged people were?
People were angry.
One woman came up to us and said, I don't know why my heterosexual monogamous marriage should feel like there's something wrong with it.
Right, exactly.
It's like, really? That's what you heard her saying?
Yeah.
Maybe she was a little exuberant in her advocacy for ethical non-monogamy, but she certainly wasn't telling people if you're in a monogamous relationship, you're square and uptight.
No, and I think people do sort of, that is that kind of selective hearing.
Yeah.
If you hear people like Dossie or Janet talking about how this sort of new standard of relationship, the way we look at monogamy and relationship dynamics is changing. And there are people that sort of wear as a badge of honor their non-vanillaness.
Right.
And I can see there's some people can sort of read into that. That's like, oh, wait a minute, you're proclaiming that this is the new standard. Are you saying that my vanilla, heteronormative, monogamous relationship there's something wrong?
Yeah.
So there is something of an implication of that sometimes. I'm not saying from Dossie or Janet, but sometimes people get very defensive about that. Yeah, I'm more traditional. I mean, how many years would a woman who chose to stay at home and raise her kids, basically got a lot of grief from working women and more feminists. That's not what you should be wanting to do. So, we can see an element of that, and there's always going to be a reaction to these changing concepts.
I love what this article, this sex geek, Andrea Zanin, I want to get in touch. Maybe we'll have her, maybe she'll come on the show.
Yeah.
I love this. She makes these points about this requirement of a lot of rules that, rules are the inverse, have an inverse relationship to trust.
Yeah, I like that. When first read that, I think that was something that did kind of jump out. Let's talk about that for a second. This idea that rules are the sort of inverse, or in a sense, rules are the opposite of trust. The more rules that are imposed, the less trust is there.
And it also goes along with this idea that if a couple is going to change the rules and play, that there has to be restraint. Mm-hmm. There has to be this negotiated, okay, what's acceptable, what's not. Again, I think a lot of therapists fall into this, like thinking they're supposed to help the couple define the rules, define the relationship, like you said, but maybe not define the rules in such a rigid way that goes against what exploring a polyamorous lifestyle might be like.
Yeah, I mean, and as you pointed out sort of in the very beginning of all of this, is sort of an inherent flaw to try to define a polyamorous relationship from the foundation of a couple.
Yeah, that's what she means by polynormativity.
Mm-hmm.
And the last one also I think fits in with the trendiness and the hesitant cultural acceptance. We all tend to want to go, look how cool and progressive we are. We're open, we're accepting, but there still needs to be some restraint. I think that's the point she's making, where she says her fourth point about polynormativity is this perception that polyamory is heterosexual-ish, also cute, young, white, new and exciting and sexy. And like so much when we talk about relationships, it can't be based on sex alone.
Right.
And it's probably not what most people think of in a fantasy idea of having lots of partners and kinky sex and running around the house and orgies all the time. Poly relationships probably deal with the same kind of issues as, paired relationships.
In a lot of ways.
I'm sure
In some ways, they're very
not
different.
Sexy.
Right, because in a lot of the relationship issues, excuse me, because, I think a real polycule doesn't have those same dynamics. And if you look at the relationship issues and conflicts that most people get into, it's kind of about the daily minutia of the relationship. The individual dynamics of the relationship,
suspects.
how they feel in that relationship, how they feel they're being treated in that relationship. And I think a real sort of poly dynamic, it should transcend all of that.
Everybody's responsible for their own feelings. Everybody's responsible for their own orgasm and sexual satisfaction.
Right.
And jealousy is not an issue. Again, this is not for everybody.
No. And I think even people that are advocates or believe they're fans often don't know what they're getting into.
Yeah, we talked a couple months ago about the, again, trendy popularity, or at least in terms of people talking about cuckold fantasies. And that gets swept up also because of someone's sexual kink for watching their partner almost in a humiliating kind of way.
Which to me is what the cuckolding
with a better
piece is.
lover. Right, or a bigger lover in the purest sense of it. And I wonder if that gets... if that muddies the waters of what
I think it do. I think we've both heard people conflate all of those things, not just things like open relationships, swinging, and some of these lifestyles, but threesomes, cuckolding. It's all lumped together. Once there's more than one person involved, it seems to be lumped into this big old bucket of poly.
Yeah. Well, this is one of those topics that certainly begs a lot more questions.
Right.
We hope we've piqued your curiosity.
Right. So with the few minutes that we have left, right, looking at how we really are in this state of flux. We are experiencing changes in the way we conceptualize relationships. People, especially younger people, are coming into their more mature years with a different idea about relationships, what they're for, what they're about. So...
And the role sex plays in them, of course.
Absolutely. So how do we, again, moving forward with all of this, what are some things that people can take with them about forming a good relationship, regardless of what we want to call it?
Trust. Dan Savage's 3 Gs, being good, giving, and game. Being open. Being open to accept that a partner or partners may have different sexual templates and tastes and likes. We should talk about this on another show because we're at our 2-minute mark. But how does someone float this? How do you say, hey, honey, I'm just curious. Do you ever think about, bringing a third person in? And they go, no, absolutely not. That's this guy. I would never do that. Oh, no, me neither. I was just curious, just throwing it out there. And now it's like it's out there forever.
Right.
Now they're making love and the other saying, are you thinking about a third person? And there's no putting the genie back in the bottle. So for another show, we'll talk about having these conversations. I'm sorry, there's our favorite listener and guest, David Hirsch, one of our favorites. We can't pick favorites, but there's a point there we'll have to save for next week. Maybe you can come on the show, Dr. Hirsch. We'll talk, but we got to go. That's our time for this week. Join us next Monday and every Monday at 9 o'clock for Sex Talk with the Siegel Brothers.
Yes, indeed. Have a great week.
I don't hear any music playing.
No, so maybe we're kind of...
We said goodbye too soon.
Yes.
There it is. But thanks.
Now
really.
it's coming.
Please hit like and share and get us spreading around and get everybody having Sex Talk
and
every
send
week.
us your ideas.
Thanks, folks.
You've been listening to Sex Talk with the Siegel Brothers. Join us every Monday night at 9 p.m. on WNN, 1470 AM and 95.3 FM. Or watch live streaming video at AMP2 TV Productions on Facebook, or look for the shows on YouTube. Thanks for tuning in, and we hope you'll join us again next week.
The opinions expressed on the preceding sponsored program were